Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Player One Start. In this video series, I've been taking a look at the PlayStation Classic. In this video, I'm going to give a final review and tell you what I think of the PlayStation Classic and really determine whether or not it's actually worth it. So if you haven't seen those videos, go ahead and click on the link that's appearing above my head somewhere to go and watch the other ones first. If this is your first time here, or you just haven't done it yet, please click that subscribe button and really help me out and help support this channel. Well, that said, go ahead and keep watching and we'll get started. Alright, so what are my thoughts on the PlayStation Classic? First, let's talk about the graphics. This was a huge sore point in a lot of the early reviews I saw about this console. Many people were expecting some sort of CRT filter added, or maybe some smooth edging, or just some sort of filter that they could apply over the graphics to make them look better, as most of these games were designed to run on a CRT television and not a modern LCD or LED HD television. My personal opinion is that these games weren't really designed to look much better than this, so there's not really too much they can do to make it run better. And part of that is you have to balance out the fact that you want these games to be authentic. In other words, you want people who have played these games before to recognize them and say, oh yeah, I remember how these games used to look. So I think maybe the decision was, some people said it was laziness from Sony's part, but I could also see it being a victim of that mentality of how much do we really change and how much do we keep the same. In my opinion, I think they could at least given an option somewhere in the menu to make it to where if people wanted to experience these games upscaled or with better textures or something, put a filter over it. I think that would have been a good idea, but it's not something that is as important to me. I mean, nothing about how they presented these games made the games unplayable, at least in terms of graphics. However, I don't think that the graphics of the PlayStation 1 have aged very well, so they should have offered some sort of smoothing or filtering to make the graphics look a little bit better when displayed on a modern television. And when you add in the choppiness of the PAL titles, most of the games on here don't really look too appealing. Next, I'm going to talk about the odd choice because we're still on graphics, and I'm specifically referring to frame rate at this point. A lot of people started complaining that they noticed some of the ROMs or the ISO images they used on this console are from the PAL regions or Europe. So I'm no expert in the field of televisions in different regions, but it seems that most of the people point out the fact that PAL regions use a different frame rate than NTSC regions here do in the United States and other parts of North America. It seems like they run at 50 frames a second, or 50 hertz if you will, and we here in America run at 60 frames a second. The result is, some people feel that these games run a bit slower than they normally would have if you got the American version. Another difference in the screens is the resolution is different between PAL and NTSC. If you overlay the two, there are actually more pixels used in the PAL region, and as a result, when you scale this on an NTSC television, it usually doesn't scale correctly, so you get these borders around your image. Personally, I'm not entirely sure why Sony made this decision. One thing I can bet you is that it made the game image cheaper. So either they own the rights to the European version and the North American version they lost, or it was just cheaper for them to license the European version. I don't know. My guess is it only came down to cost. But does it make these games unplayable? Well, for those of you who remember these games growing up, I would see this as very annoying. If the games don't play in terms of frame rate exactly the way I remember them from my childhood, yes, I get annoyed, and I get annoyed very quickly, and it would be something I would complain about. So is that something that does hurt this console? Absolutely. But on the flip side of that, if you're new to any of these games and you don't know how they were originally played, I didn't notice. Any game that I had not played before, I didn't notice any bit of a difference on. So if you've played these games before and you're expecting the exact same experience, like you know exactly which frame you're supposed to press the X button on, you may be disappointed in these ROMs. I really didn't see an issue with it. So that said, if they had included a game like Crash Bandicoot Warped and it ran slower than I'm used to it playing, yes, I would be incredibly annoyed at it, and I would see this as a huge oversight on their part. Let's talk about one more thing. This console actually outputs in 720p. I actually tried to get my capture card to capture at 1080, but it just won't go any higher than that. So 720p seems to be the maximum on this. And I think that everyone's complaint about this is mainly due to the fact that if we have hackers who have gone in the community and started emulating these consoles, you can get better settings with a cheaper device. So for example, I've seen a lot of people who have shown footage that they captured off of a Raspberry Pi. The game runs at 60 frames a second, it runs at 1080p, and they have filters and upscalers to make the games look better. Why Sony couldn't accomplish this, or chose not to, I think boils down to cost. They wanted to save as much money as possible with this, and in my opinion, again, coming from the fact of I don't know what decisions they made to make this console, but then there's that $100 price tag. So they made this console as cheaply as possible, but then they charged the most that anyone has to date yet to charge for a mini classic console. And that surprises me because Nintendo, I thought, would have been the one to do that. Did PlayStation think they would have the same draw to their product as Nintendo? I think they could have, but in that case, they would have had to include different games. It all comes down to that. All right, next, let's move on to game selection. Even if I were to go back and pick 20 games out of my collection to play on the PlayStation, I don't know if I could come up with more than 10 off the top of my head. To me, the PlayStation 1 is iconic, but I think it lacks a lot of the good games, especially first-party games, that Nintendo had for their console. Case in point, their top 3 leading franchises that I remember from first getting a PlayStation were Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, and Tomb Raider. Not a single one of those games was actually developed by Sony. In my personal opinion, I think that they could have narrowed down the game selection and included more recognizable titles rather than having 20 that were okay, but nothing I've ever heard of before. On the flip side of that, I discovered a lot of games that I had never played on the PlayStation, and I don't think I found a bad one on this console. Except for one. I don't like the first Grand Theft Auto. But another thing that limits them on this console is that they didn't include the dual analog sticks. So the later Crash Bandicoots, Spyro the Dragon, Gran Turismo, all of those games are out automatically. Here's a stepped-back analytical view of all of the games that are included on the PlayStation Classic. This actually shows that there is a fairly balanced amount of genres represented on this console. The only game I didn't categorize was Cool Borders 2, as it seemed kind of like an outlier, although if I threw it with the fighters, that could also be part of the sports category. Pulling back a little bit, you can also see which titles are PAL and which are NTSC. My least favorite genre on here is actually the one that has the most titles, and that is the shooter genre. Again, the most common thing I cited in those games were that the controls are not very user-friendly, or they differ too much between each title. Comparing this list to the top 20 best-selling PlayStation 1 games, you can see that there are not too many of them they chose out of this list. Granted, I wouldn't expect just the best-selling games to be included on here, and if we at least include some game series that were represented by one of the titles being on here, there are 4 games on this console representing 8 of the top 20 best-selling titles. Again, 3 franchises that I have mentioned are on this list, including Crash Bandicoot, Tomb Raider, and Spyro the Dragon. Now, I obviously can't speak for Sony on this one, but I think their odd assortment of games was due to the fact that they chose some of those popular games out of each region and included them on one console. Perhaps if they had made a PlayStation Classic that had a different game list by region, they could have chosen a better list of games that were either more popular or at least more iconic titles that people could have enjoyed. Some other games from my list I think should have been on here include Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Driver, Parappa the Rapper, Croc, Silent Hill, Need for Speed, Legacy of Kain, and I'm sure there are many more, but those are just some of the ones I can think of off the top of my head. So overall, I would say the game selection is more or less mediocre, and not necessarily a deal breaker for getting this console, but definitely not one of its selling points. Next, we'll talk about sound. Nothing to complain about here. All of the sounds seem to be faithfully reproduced. There were only a couple of moments that I noticed in-game where the sound glitched a little bit. To me, it was barely noticeable, and I didn't think anything sounded bad or unacceptable. Now, it is important to note that the PlayStation is capable of 2 different types of audio. The first is a sampled audio player, which can support up to 24 channels at once, with a sampling rate of up to 44.1 kHz, which I believe was standard CD quality audio. It supported MIDI sequencing with digital effects including pitch modulation, envelope, looping, and digital reverb. However, at this time, due to the abundance of storage on CDs, some game developers entirely abandoned music synthesis and went towards having just a large sample, such as a CD audio track, for all music in their games, or using a combination of the two. Either way, I didn't run into any issues during the games that I was playing. It's not to say that these issues don't exist, but your results may vary based on how your home audio is set up. Let's go ahead and listen to some examples from both games that used samples and CD audio.
8 traveling fighters brought together by a common destiny now meet at the battle arena Toshinden.
Jumping Flash!
But if you're one of those people, again, just like with the frame rate, that need to hear something exactly right and not expect it to glitch in emulation, you may be a little bit disappointed again. But I think that's only going to affect people who are extremely picky like that. And I don't mean that in a bad way, I just mean that it's something that I could get over very easily and not worry about. So all of that aside, do I believe that the PlayStation Classic is indeed worth it to collect? I would say for the price that I bought it, $30, hands down. I mean, I think it was a good decision. I got hours of gameplay out of this, and I just based it on the fact that I already own a PlayStation, but to collect all the games on this system, paying $30 for this system is cheaper than going out and buying these games individually. And I don't have to worry about getting it to work on a modern television because it automatically is already overput out through HDMI. And if you're a newcomer to this console and you want to see some of the other games that were out there, there's no way to add games onto here, at least the way that Sony intended. If you're one who wants to relive some of those other games that aren't on this console, again, this is something you should skip over. I guess what I'm saying at this point is I felt it was worth it because I waited until it got to a price I was willing to pay for it, and I got a lot of fun and enjoyment out of it. I really do think I'll actually go back and play some of these games again, especially Intelligent Cube. So I would say it depends on what you want to collect it for. So I would recommend this console only for people who have already played the PlayStation 1 and want to experience either some games that are new, some games that are different, and number one, don't mind that frame rate and don't mind having some of the European versions. And you know, I'm putting a lot of caveats on this, so I guess what I'm saying is, if you're new to the PlayStation 1, it might be better to wait for something else to come out. Or, you can still download some of these old PlayStation games for PlayStation consoles. You know, Spyro the Dragon and Crash Bandicoot just got their remakes, so those aren't even necessary to play on the original consoles anymore, even though I would still recommend it. To tell you the truth, I think the thing that may have driven gamers away from this the most was the price point. By putting the price at $100, more than any other micro console before it, PlayStation was claiming that this would be better than all of the rest. And unfortunately, I don't think it lives up to that expectation. So if you take a look at the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, those have possibly the most popular games on each system. Yeah, they're leaving a few of them out, especially for those of us that grew up with the systems, but most of the essentials are there. Here on the PlayStation Classic, especially for those of us who didn't get into it until later on in the console's life cycle, this console is missing a few things. I've already went over a few of the games I felt should have been on it, and I know a lot of other people have used that as evidence of why this console is not very good, but I think the biggest thing is that they didn't include the dual analog sticks. Granted, I didn't really care about the force feedback back in the day. Yeah, it was kind of a neat gimmick, but it's not a game-breaking feature for me that it doesn't have the dual shock. I think the dual analog stick should have been included, so they can include most of the games I'm fond of on this system. Where can Sony go from here, in my opinion? Well, first, I don't think it's going to happen, but I think that Sony should release another PlayStation Classic. Call it the PS1 Classic. Even model it after the PlayStation 1. You know, the slim model they came out with in the late 90s, early 2000s. Give it the dual analog sticks, 2 controllers, and put the games on there that most of us wanted. Like Tomb Raider, like Crash, like Spyro. And I think people would be more forgiving. Definitely remember to keep it at a price point that matches what the product is that you're selling. Listen to your customer feedback. Put in some of those features that we got with the PlayStation 2 and the PS3 when we had backward compatibility. Give us the smoothing. Give us some filters. You know, give us something we can't get with normal emulators. Or at the very least, give us the stuff we can do with emulators. I think this product can be turned around with just that in itself. Now, of course, this is only a theory and my opinion, but I think that that would be the best way for PlayStation to proceed at this point. I think maybe Sony sees this as they got a lot of pushback from fans. I don't know if they really consider it a huge failure at this point, but let's just say they don't really seem too encouraged about making another one. Although it is my sincere wish that they do, especially with the PlayStation 2. So if they made a PS2 Classic, think about some of the obstacles they wouldn't have to overcome anymore. For example, which controller to include. The PlayStation 2 had the same controller from the beginning of its life cycle to the end. That also wouldn't limit them on what kind of games they can put on there. One limiting factor on the PlayStation 2 that's not part of the PlayStation 1 is the game size. The games came on CDs and DVDs, and the DVDs themselves I think could go up to 4 gigabytes, and some of them even had multiple discs. So at that point, you're looking at how big an internal memory do you need to put in this console. And of course, the larger internal memory means the higher the cost is going to be because you have to include all that extra storage. Also, Sony even kind of admitted, at least with the PlayStation 3, that they didn't have PS2 emulation completely down. In fact, it's still something that the emulation scene is struggling with today. Again, do I think any of this stuff's going to happen? Not really, but it is something I could be hopeful for in the future. I think that Sony is often willing to try certain things, but if it's not an instant success, it seems like they back off it pretty quickly. And for evidence to support my claims on here, I will reference the PlayStation TV and the PlayStation Vita. Both were very widely supported at first, but when they weren't an instant success, Sony quickly abandoned them. And so those are 2 products that I did buy that I really don't feel like I can do much with, or they didn't live up to their potential. But anyway, that is just my 2 cents on it. What do you guys think of this console? Have you guys played it? If you have, leave a comment below. Let other people know what you guys thought of it. I'd really like to see your guys' take on it, and I look forward to continuing this discussion with you guys. So if you did like the video, please leave a comment below. Definitely make sure to leave a like. And if you'd like me to continue this video series by hacking my PlayStation Classic, let me know in the comments below, and I will consider making a video on it. That said, I really want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to see some of the content I've already done, feel free to click on some of the suggestions that are popping up on your screen. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.